Joker 2 was a masterpiece. A film I believe to be misunderstood, but before I begin, it's important to note that your perception of the movie is valid. Art is meant to be subjectively interpreted, and my only job here is to offer my personal insight of said work of art. This is all a long-winded way to say you're allowed to disagree with me, and that there is nothing wrong with that. I want productive dialogue around this film, as I think it's an important one, both what it says in the text, but also on a metatextual level. That being said, I think even the first film is a bit misunderstood, and that Arthur's evident psychotic break is somewhat praised by fans as him finally being free of a mad world, which in turn puts the audience in a similar chair as Joker's supporters in the movie. I think the first film does a good job in showing that this mental illness, this psychotic break, is not something to be celebrated, but rather is a human in need of serious help. Help that he, quite frankly, isn't getting. There is no cathartic release here. And I feel like some audience members, not all, don't completely get this idea, as they've been conditioned to view mental illness under certain scopes. But, alas, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Furthermore, this video will spoil the entirety of the movie. If you haven't seen it, I'd implore you to go support and watch it, but it's not required for this viewing. I will do my best to keep things cohesive in this video, but we will be jumping around a bit as this will not be a recap video. We clear on that? Okay? Okay. Also, this essay will contain some themes that may be uncomfortable for viewers, but if you've seen the film, or even the first one, and weren't triggered, you should be fine here. So then, let's begin. Joker 2 is a film that offers objective reality, which is kind of funny, as Arthur Fleck certainly does not live within such a reality. And yet Joker 2 seems determined to offer us a glimpse into what actually happened in the first film, directly subverting the concept of that first movie, where that one was ambiguous as to what was really happening. The second not only answers what happened in the first, but also offers objectivity in its own pages. If the first one was a deconstruction of the Joker character, something the second film seems to confirm, then this new one is a complete subversion of it, ultimately ending with Arthur Fleck as, well, Arthur Fleck. Most people seem to share a common critical consensus. Why is this film a musical? And to answer that question, I want to propose a subsequent question. What is 2001: A Space Odyssey? If you've seen the film, you will know that it is far from conventional, and I myself would certainly classify it as, well, a musical. In fact, I would say it is much more of a musical than Joker 2, but that they both feature musical numbers, albeit in drastically different ways, for a reason. In 2001, it seems to be to try and encapsulate the human condition and its evolution through its most obvious outlet, art. That the music in the film shows us, the audience, that communication itself, the way in which we have evolved this far, is an art form. And that the very act of perception of a world we have no understanding of is, in itself, what art actually is, with music being the sound that speaks the soul. Joker 2, then, tells an incredibly different story, with the musical numbers being present to show Arthur's repressed emotions. I feel like that needs more explaining. Arthur was a victim of abuse, and while the characters in the film posit that this has caused him to create an entirely new and importantly separate personality, I would disagree. Just as Amori the game is not about dissociative identity disorder, but rather Amori the character is a front created to repress Sonny's emotions, while also acting as a cover for his associative amnesia, Arthur's problem seems to be similar. He forgot the trauma he survived as a child, indicating clear dissociative amnesia, but he also uses the Joker persona as an outward expression of the emotions and trauma he has bottled up and repressed over many, many years. It's kind of a similar concept to Josh from Until Dawn, with the killer persona not being a separate personality, but rather an expression of guilt over the loss of his sisters. The musical numbers are simply Arthur expressing and, more importantly, processing the emotions that he has no idea how to actually process. They're the Joker persona coming out and helping him process said thoughts, which is then little more than a coping mechanism. They and the entire identity of the Joker are an escape mechanism. But Arthur is mentally ill, and I at least would theorize that he is psychotic. This was a general concept of the first film, and it was rather obvious that he most likely suffered from schizophrenia. And I have expertise in that area as I myself have schizoaffective disorder. Also, adding this on after I already did the voiceover, but the film's marketing line of "the world is a stage" makes me believe that the Joker persona, and especially the musical numbers, are also Arthur's subconscious way of processing his now infamous new identity, with him feeling more like an actor on stage than a person living life. Perhaps a commentary on celebrity culture? That is all. My theory then is that, like in the first film, the system has ultimately failed Arthur. They believe him to have an entirely separate personality when his actual problem is most likely something completely different. Psychosis. And while they acknowledge that his embodied self lives within a fantasy world, they seem to attribute this to DID, or dissociative identity disorder. This is apparently a very common misconception amongst the public, and I would imagine this was true of even the medical system back when the film takes place. Schizophrenia does indeed, phonetically speaking, mean split mind, derived from Greek words, but this is labeled as it is due to loose association as opposed to actual split personalities. And yet, many people simply just confuse the two, believing they're essentially one and the same. And a voiceover note here, I think that part of the reason they do this is to deem people as quote-unquote crazy. This, of course, affects treatment plans. And while we don't see what medication Arthur does take in the film, it can be theorized they were not the atypical antipsychotics he should be on. We can't be certain of that, but at the very least his treatment plan is probably not as effective as it could be based on this misconception of his actual diagnosis. Also, another voiceover note here. We see him take, I believe it is 3 pills, which a lot of schizophrenic patients would take more than that, but that's really just conjecture on my part. The musical numbers reflect this delusion in a fantasy that Arthur experiences. They embody the Joker, which, while being an expression of his repressed emotions, is also itself the delusion amongst many others that people care about Arthur. Harley Quinn, played by the brilliant Lady Gaga, does not love Arthur Fleck. She loves the Joker. She loves the radicalized symbol that he has become, believing the Joker to be who Arthur actually is, at least on some level. I imagine, despite being well raised, that she always felt the calling for something more, a purpose. And when she sees Joker on The Murray Show, it seems she finds that purpose. But Arthur is not the Joker. The Joker doesn't exist. As his mom said, he made it up. He could never be the Joker because it was an idea, a symbol, bigger than any singular person. And Harley comes to realize this, saying Arthur gave up on the fantasy. And it even seems that Arthur knew this was going to happen, as his doubts of their relationship shine through with their musical numbers. Even in his most delusional state, those numbers still represent his repressed emotions. And we see that he doesn't really trust in their relationship, as she literally kills him in one of them. You can say the musical numbers are just a psychotic break from reality. And they certainly are. I think that's undeniable. But I think we should analyze their purpose even past just that point. I understand when people say they're pointless and alienate the audience, or that they disrupt the flow of storytelling. That seems to be the popular consensus, at least. But you have to understand, Arthur is the story. The camera is nothing other than his mind's eye. and we need to see how he truly feels inside. So I feel as if they are necessary, and they're also just straight bangers, so there's that too. And they are old licensed songs because their love isn't even just unoriginal, it's fake. They talk to each other solely through outbursts of repressed emotions, through song, which is real for Arthur, but Harley is herself a lying facade. When Arthur just wants her to stop singing and simply talk to him at the end of the film, she can't. Because Harley was never interested in him as a person, but him as a reflection of the repressed feelings she herself had. Her desire for purpose. And that's why she can only sing, as that is the only line of communication she ever had any interest in. I was shocked when Arthur, dressed in his full Joker getup, completely broke character at the end of the film during his trial's closing statement. I genuinely thought that he would completely adopt the Joker persona, just as we see in the brilliant analog horror series Alice in Dreams. But he doesn't. He has a moment of lucidity in the chaos and finally comes to express the emotions he just couldn't before. He just wants to start over. We saw this a bit during his official interview near the end of Act 1, as he wanted to nail home how he has changed, but he never outright said it, because he couldn't. Because he was still repressing his emotions. Because the Joker still existed. But as that persona shatters, as he gains a new level of awareness we haven't really seen in either of the two films, he essentially kills the Joker in this singular, tragic, beautiful moment. He decides to live out of the fantasy, to face what he has done by even admitting to the public that he killed his mother, which pushes Harley away, the only person he had ever told that to. Harley Quinn is his escapist fantasy, and by telling the public something he only told her, this is him, well, facing reality. But some people won't accept that. They take his words seriously, that he wants to blow it all up, being a literal interpretation of blowing up the court building as opposed to what he actually means, to move on, to live. But unfortunately, it's too late. Not only is his new reason for existing not willing to live outside of the fantasy, not willing to live with Arthur Fleck, but like it or not, Arthur has, in the eyes of so many people, already become the Joker. He has already killed people, some in cold blood, and he can't just take that back. His life is not just his anymore, as he's become a radicalized symbol of a rebellion against the corrupt and oppressive Gotham. That's what Harley, his love, sees him as. And that's what his supporters see him as too. When, in his final monologue, he reveals to us in the audience in the film's world that he just wants to live as Arthur Fleck. As Arthur Fleck. But he is found guilty on all counts, and he can't help but laugh. Not as Arthur, no, as the Joker, which I see as another failure of the system, as he very clearly needs serious psychiatric help. But instead, not only was he locked up in an abusive institution, but he has been sentenced to the death penalty. But then, boom! An explosion? Finally, some action! I thought this was supposed to be a DC film. Where was all the action? And while this is a textual subversion of what Arthur truly wants, I think it's much more of a metatextual subversion. This is what the audience wanted and expected. To see some action. And more importantly, to see a psychotic person does bad things, as we all have grown so accustomed to in the media we consume. But instead we are given musical numbers and a ton of dialogue. Instead, we are shown a character study of a single man, Arthur Fleck. If the first film was the origin story of the Joker, then the second one is the origin story of Arthur Fleck. Not the symbol, but the human. And not only does this bring necessity to the second film and make it viable as a sequel, but also completely subverts a film, the first, that was already a deconstruction on its own. It's a commentary on the audience themselves, conditioned to have certain expectations about superhero movies and, more importantly, psychosis. But this, ultimately, isn't good enough for everyone. And the final joke of the film embodies this. What I at first thought was, to speak candidly, a stupid ending, has been recontextualized for me upon further thinking. I mean, some no-name character that got an ounce of foreshadowing just kills Arthur in cold blood? Really? That's how we're going to suddenly end it? Well, yeah. Because he is a no-name. No name. Not a character, but a surrogate. An insert for the very audience that is watching the film. It's the audience rejecting the very concept of the film. There didn't need to be a sequel, or why is it a musical, or I can't wait to see Batman, when in reality, it's about more than that. The writers could have just played it safe and made 10 sequels of Batman and the Joker fighting it out. But they decided to pave a different path. One that shows the system for how flawed it is. One that shows the audience not what it wants to see, but what it needs to see. One that entirely recontextualizes the first film. One that is the story of Arthur Fleck, not the Joker. It's not called, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Joker. Folie, Deux, because it is a story about Joker and Harley Quinn, two very delusional people. No. Rather, the shared delusion here is the perspective of the very audience that is watching the film. The idea that psychosis makes people evil. That a film should reinforce that fact. That a film should be about good versus evil, when indeed the first Joker wasn't even about that. It is the shared delusion that a film called Joker is about the Joker. Another part I'm adding after the voiceover, but I've also seen it theorized that the man that kills Arthur is supposed to be the real Joker that Batman will face off against. Which is a very interesting concept. He then becomes not just an audience surrogate, but an embodiment of their expectations for the film. We are done with the tragic portrayal of a mentally ill man in need of help, like we're literally just going to kill him off, but we're now replacing him with what the audience thinks they wanted. A pure psychopath devoid of the character introspection and full of common villain cliches. Audience have rejected this concept, as they seemingly have rejected the entire film, at least based on the box office and reviews. It's nonsensical when it depicts a disorder that in itself creates a nonsensical reality. And it seems like Todd Phillips may have even predicted this outcome based on the themes of the story, but that's just speculation on my part. That he predicted people would kill this film for not being what they thought it was, or would be. Just as the nameless man kills Arthur for not being the symbol he had thought he was, or would be. The audience killed the Joker because he was not the Joker. You, yes you, Steve, saw yourself, even a small part of you, in that villain. You wanted a film with more Joker in it. But that wasn't what you got. Instead, he was, finally, Arthur Fleck. Something that you simply couldn't accept. something you didn't see fit for him. And so, in the end, well, he got what he fucking deserves. And, as always, thank you for watching.